The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle's ancient stones as Camilla Parker Bowles walked briskly down the marble corridor. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with each determined step. In her perfectly manicured hand, she clutched a cream-colored envelope that bore the distinctive seal of Kensington Palace. The letter had arrived just an hour earlier, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who seemed eager to escape as quickly as possible. Camilla had recognized the elegant handwriting immediately. It belonged to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, though most still called her Kate. The two women had maintained a careful dance of politeness for years, but beneath the surface, tensions had been building like pressure in a kettle about to boil. Camilla paused at the window overlooking the East Terrace garden. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. She had read the letter 3 times now, each reading making her anger rise another degree. Kate's words were carefully chosen, diplomatically phrased, but their meaning was crystal clear. The younger woman was questioning decisions that were not hers to question. The letter concerned the upcoming state visit from the Danish royal family. Kate had written with what she called concerns about the seating arrangements for the official dinner. She suggested that certain protocols were being overlooked and that perhaps a more traditional approach would be appropriate. But Camilla knew better. This wasn't about seating charts or protocol. This was about power, influence, and Kate's growing confidence in challenging the established order. For months now, Camilla had noticed subtle changes in how Kate carried herself. The younger woman seemed more assertive in meetings, more willing to voice opinions that contradicted established plans. As queen consort, Camilla had worked hard to find her place in the royal hierarchy. She had endured years of criticism, weathered countless storms, and, finally, achieved a position of respect and authority. She wasn't about to let anyone, even the beloved Princess of Wales, undermine that. The weight of the letter in her hand felt heavier with each passing moment. Camilla thought back to the early days when Kate first joined the family. The young woman had been so eager to please, so careful to follow every rule and tradition. Those days seemed like a distant memory now. Marriage to William had given Kate confidence, but motherhood had given her something far more dangerous, a sense of her own importance in the royal narrative. Camilla's phone buzzed softly. A text message from her private secretary reminded her of the afternoon schedule. There was a meeting with the Lord Chamberlain's office, followed by a review of Christmas card designs, and then tea with a group of military wives. All routine activities that now felt insignificant compared to the crisis brewing between her and Kate. She walked to her private sitting room, a space decorated in warm golds and deep blues that usually brought her comfort. Today, however, the familiar surroundings felt oppressive. The walls seemed to close in as she considered her options. She could ignore the letter, pretend it never arrived. She could respond diplomatically, maintaining the facade of family harmony. Or she could make a statement that would leave no doubt about who held the real authority. The antique writing desk in the corner of the room had been a gift from Charles when they married. Its polished surface had witnessed countless important correspondences over the years. Camilla approached it slowly, the letter still clutched in her hand. She pulled out the leather chair and sat down, placing the envelope before her. For a moment, she simply stared at it. The royal seal seemed to mock her, representing everything Kate had inherited simply by marrying into the family. Camilla had fought for every ounce of respect she now commanded. She had earned her position through years of dedication, through supporting Charles during his most difficult periods, through slowly winning over a public that had once despised her. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside broke her concentration. She could hear 2 staff members discussing arrangements for the evening's dinner. Their voices faded as they passed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the damning letter. Camilla opened her desk drawer and retrieved a silver letter opener, another gift from Charles. The blade gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as she carefully slit open the envelope. She pulled out the letter one final time, reading Kate's polite but pointed words with fresh eyes. Each sentence seemed more presumptuous than the last. Without warning, a surge of anger coursed through her. Years of careful restraint, of measured responses, of diplomatic silence suddenly felt like wasted effort. Kate's letter represented something far more significant than a disagreement about protocol. It was a challenge to Camilla's authority, a suggestion that the queen consort's decisions could be questioned by someone with no real understanding of royal responsibility. The letter tore easily in her hands. The sound of ripping paper filled the quiet room like a thunderclap. Once she started, she couldn't stop. The cream-colored stationery fell apart in her fingers, each tear feeling like a release of months of accumulated frustration. Kate's carefully chosen words became meaningless fragments scattered across the desk's polished surface. As the last piece of paper fluttered to the floor, Camilla felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. She had crossed a line, taken an action that couldn't be undone. The letter was destroyed, but the problems it represented remained. In fact, by destroying it, she had likely made those problems much worse. She stood up from the desk and walked back to the window. The garden below looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier, but everything else had changed. The careful balance of royal relationships, the delicate web of family politics, the unspoken agreements that kept the monarchy functioning smoothly, all of it was now in jeopardy because of what she had just done. Camilla knew that Kate would eventually ask about the letter. There would be questions about whether it had been received, whether her concerns were being considered. And when those questions came, Camilla would have to decide how to respond. She could lie, claim the letter never arrived. She could deflect, change the subject, or find excuses to avoid the conversation entirely. But, deep down, she knew that Kate would eventually learn the truth. The younger woman was too intelligent, too observant to be fooled for long. When that moment came, when Kate realized that her carefully crafted letter had been torn to pieces and thrown away like common rubbish, the consequences would be severe. The afternoon shadows were growing longer now, and soon it would be time for her next appointment. Camilla gathered the scattered pieces of the letter and walked to the fireplace. The flames consumed Kate's words quickly, leaving nothing but ash and the acrid smell of burning paper. As she watched the last fragments disappear, Camilla wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her royal career. The letter was gone, but the reckoning that would surely follow was only just beginning. 3 days had passed since Camilla destroyed Kate's letter, and the silence from Kensington Palace was becoming deafening. Kate typically followed up on important correspondence within 48 hours, yet there had been no phone calls, no additional letters, no requests for meetings. The absence of communication felt more ominous than any angry confrontation would have been. Camilla tried to maintain her usual routine, but concentration proved elusive. During the meeting with the Lord Chamberlain's office, she found herself nodding absently while her mind wandered to what Kate might be thinking. The Christmas card review session dragged on endlessly as she struggled to focus on ribbon colors and font choices that suddenly seemed trivial. It was during tea with the military wives that everything began to unravel. Mrs. Harrison, the wife of a decorated colonel, was discussing her daughter's upcoming wedding when she made an innocent comment that sent chills down Camilla's spine. "Princess Catherine was so helpful when we were planning the ceremony," Mrs. Harrison said, stirring sugar into her tea. She even offered to review the seating arrangements personally. Such attention to detail, that one. She mentioned she'd been working on some important protocol matters recently. Camilla's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down too quickly. "Oh, did she mention anything specific?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Nothing too detailed," Mrs. Harrison replied. "Just that she was concerned about maintaining proper traditions. She seemed quite passionate about getting things right." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Camilla's mind was racing. Kate was clearly discussing their disagreement with others, probably framing it as a matter of upholding royal traditions. The younger woman was building a case, gathering support, preparing for something bigger than a simple protocol dispute. That evening, Camilla found herself pacing the length of her private sitting room. Charles was away on official business, leaving her alone with her growing anxiety. She had tried calling her closest confidant, but even that conversation had brought little comfort. The more she thought about the situation, the more she realized how poorly she had handled it. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Camilla's private secretary knocked on her door with an unusual urgency in her expression. "Your Majesty," she said, using the formal address that always felt strange to Camilla's ears. "Princess Catherine's office has called 3 times this morning. They're requesting a meeting to discuss the Danish state visit preparations." Camilla felt her stomach drop. What exactly did they say? They mentioned some correspondence that may have been misplaced and wanted to ensure all concerns were being addressed properly. The secretary paused, studying Camilla's face. "Should I schedule the meeting for this afternoon?" "Tell them I'm reviewing my calendar," Camilla replied, buying herself time to think. "I'll get back to them by the end of the day." After the secretary left, Camilla sat heavily in her chair. Kate was being strategic, professional, giving her the opportunity to admit the letter had gone astray or been overlooked. It was a diplomatic approach that made Camilla's destructive response seem even more petty and inappropriate. She spent the morning trying to craft a response that would minimize the damage. Perhaps she could claim the letter had been misfiled, or that there had been a miscommunication with her staff. But every excuse she considered sounded weak and unbelievable. Kate wasn't naive. She would see through any attempt at deception. The afternoon brought another complication. During a routine briefing about upcoming engagements, Camilla learned that Kate had been having private conversations with several senior staff members. The discussions were described as informal consultations about protocol matters, but Camilla recognized them for what they really were. Kate was building alliances. The realization hit her like a physical blow. While Camilla had been sitting in her room worrying about the destroyed letter, Kate had been actively working to strengthen her position. The younger woman wasn't just upset about one ignored piece of correspondence. She was making a calculated move to establish herself as a more significant voice in royal decision-making. That evening, Camilla made a decision that she would later recognize as her second major mistake. Instead of agreeing to meet with Kate directly, she decided to address the situation through intermediaries. She called a meeting with the senior staff members who had been speaking with Kate, hoping to present her own version of events before things went any further. The meeting took place in the Oak Room, a formal space that Camilla chose specifically to emphasize her authority. The senior staff members, the Lord Chamberlain's deputy, the head of protocol, and 2 private secretaries, sat around the polished mahogany table with carefully neutral expressions. "I understand there have been some questions about the Danish state visit arrangements," Camilla began, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt inside. "I want to ensure that everyone understands the decisions that have been made and the reasoning behind them." She spent 20 minutes outlining her vision for the event, emphasizing her experience and expertise in these matters. She spoke about the importance of modernizing certain traditions and the need to adapt royal protocol to contemporary expectations. Throughout her presentation, she avoided any direct mention of Kate's letter or their disagreement. When she finished, the room remained uncomfortably silent. Finally, the Lord Chamberlain's deputy spoke up. "Your Majesty, we appreciate your clarification," he said carefully. "However, Princess Catherine did raise some specific concerns that warrant consideration. Perhaps a direct discussion between you would be the most productive approach." Camilla felt heat rising in her cheeks. Even her own staff were essentially telling her to handle the situation properly. "I'll consider that suggestion," she replied, knowing she sounded defensive. After the meeting ended and the staff members filed out, Camilla remained alone in the Oak Room. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to highlight the empty chairs around the table, emphasizing her isolation. She had tried to use her position and authority to control the narrative, but instead had only made herself appear petty and unwilling to engage in proper communication. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Charles, checking in from his official engagement in Scotland. "How are things at home?" he had written, adding a heart emoji that would have made her smile under different circumstances. Camilla stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple, "All fine here. Miss you." She couldn't bring herself to tell him about the growing crisis, especially since it was entirely of her own making. That night, she lay awake thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. She had worked so hard to earn respect and acceptance within the royal family and from the British public. The journey had been long and difficult, marked by years of negative press coverage and public skepticism about her relationship with Charles. When she finally achieved the position of Queen Consort, it had felt like vindication for all those years of struggle. But now, in trying to protect that position, she had created a conflict that threatened to undermine everything she had worked to achieve. The worst part was that Kate's original letter had contained legitimate points. Reading it again in her memory, Camilla could acknowledge that some of the younger woman's suggestions had merit. The seating arrangements could indeed be improved, and certain protocol elements deserved reconsideration. But pride and defensiveness had prevented her from seeing past the perceived challenge to her authority. As dawn approached, Camilla finally admitted to herself what she had been avoiding since the moment she tore up the letter. She had made a serious error in judgment, one that had escalated a manageable disagreement into a genuine crisis. Kate wasn't trying to undermine her authority. She was trying to contribute to the family's success. And instead of welcoming that contribution, Camilla had responded with suspicion and hostility. The question now was whether it was too late to fix the damage she had caused. Kate had clearly moved beyond waiting for a simple response to her letter. The younger woman was now actively working to address the issues she had raised, with or without Camilla's cooperation. Camilla realized she had a choice to make. She could continue down the path of defensive behavior, trying to maintain her position through authority and intimidation. Or she could swallow her pride, admit her mistake, and try to rebuild the relationship with Kate before it was too late. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Camilla finally made her decision. She would call Kate's office first thing in the morning and request an immediate meeting. She would apologize for the delayed response and find a way to explain what had happened without completely destroying her credibility. But, as she drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she might already be too late. Kate was intelligent, observant, and increasingly confident in her own judgment. She would not be easily fooled or placated. The reckoning that Camilla had been dreading was about to begin, and she was no longer in control of how it would unfold. The call to Kensington Palace came at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, just as Camilla had planned. She had rehearsed what she would say, choosing her words carefully to sound conciliatory without appearing weak. But when Kate's private secretary answered the phone, the response she received was not what she had expected. "I'm terribly sorry, Your Majesty," the secretary said in a tone that was polite, but notably cool. "Princess Catherine is not available for a meeting this week. She has several pre-existing commitments that cannot be rescheduled." Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. In the world of royal protocol, being told someone was not available was often code for something far more serious than a busy calendar. "Perhaps next week then," she suggested, trying to keep her voice light. "I'll need to check her schedule and get back to you," came the reply, followed by a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Is there a specific matter you wish to discuss? I could pass along a message if it's urgent." The offer to relay a message was almost insulting. Kate was clearly making a point about proper communication channels and the importance of written correspondence. Camilla declined politely and hung up the phone, knowing she had just been given a royal snub disguised as professional courtesy. Within hours, word of the denied meeting request had somehow spread through the palace staff network. Camilla noticed the subtle changes immediately. Staff members who usually engaged in brief, pleasant conversations now kept their interactions strictly professional. The friendly nods and warm smiles she had grown accustomed to were replaced with formal bows and carefully neutral expressions. It was during her afternoon constitutional walk through the palace gardens that Camilla encountered the first direct evidence of how serious the situation had become. As she rounded the corner near the rose garden, she almost collided with Lady Margaret Thornfield, one of the Queen's most trusted ladies-in-waiting and someone Camilla had considered a friend. "Margaret," Camilla said with genuine pleasure, grateful for a familiar face. "How lovely to see you. I feel like it's been ages." Lady Margaret's response was cordial but notably restrained. "Your Majesty," she said with a small curtsy. "I hope you're well." "Quite well, thank you. And how is your granddaughter? Last we spoke, she was applying to university." "She's doing very well. Thank you for asking." Margaret paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I actually had tea with Princess Catherine yesterday. She mentioned some concerns about upcoming protocol arrangements." The comment landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of implication that spread far beyond its simple surface meaning. Lady Margaret was essentially telling Camilla that Kate had been discussing their disagreement with members of the senior royal household, people whose opinions carried significant weight in palace politics. "How interesting," Camilla managed to say, maintaining her composure despite feeling increasingly cornered. "I do hope she knows she can bring any concerns directly to me." "I'm sure she does," Margaret replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Though sometimes it can be helpful to have informal discussions first, to ensure one's thoughts are properly organized before raising important matters." After Margaret excused herself and continued on her walk, Camilla stood alone among the roses, finally, understanding the full scope of what she was facing. Kate wasn't just upset about one ignored letter. She was methodically building a case for why her voice deserved more respect in royal decision-making. And she was doing it by demonstrating exactly the kind of thoughtful, consultative approach that made her look reasonable while making Camilla appear dismissive and autocratic. The next blow came during what should have been a routine meeting about Christmas arrangements. Camilla was reviewing plans for the annual royal family gathering at Sandringham when her private secretary mentioned an unexpected development. "There's been a slight change to the Christmas schedule," she said, consulting her notes. "Prince William and Princess Catherine have requested permission to host a separate celebration at Anmer Hall for their close friends and some family members. Camilla looked up sharply. Separate celebration? When? The same weekend as the main Sandringham gathering. They've described it as a more intimate, modern approach to the holiday season. The implications were staggering. William and Kate were essentially creating an alternative royal Christmas, one that would inevitably draw comparisons to the traditional celebration that Camilla was helping to organize. It was a brilliant tactical move. They weren't openly rejecting the established tradition, merely offering a different option that would likely prove more appealing to younger family members and progressive-minded royals. Have they received approval for this? Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The request went directly to His Majesty, and he's given his blessing. He apparently feels it's a wonderful idea to have multiple celebrations that accommodate different preferences. Camilla felt the walls closing in around her. Charles's approval of William and Kate's alternative celebration was more than just a scheduling decision. It was a tacit endorsement of their approach to royal life. Her husband was essentially taking sides in her conflict with Kate, and he wasn't choosing her side. That evening, when Charles finally returned from his official duties in Scotland, Camilla was waiting in their private sitting room with a glass of wine and a carefully composed expression. She had decided that honesty, at least partial honesty, was her only remaining option. "How was Scotland?" she asked as he settled into his favorite armchair. "Productive, though exhausting," he replied, loosening his tie. The shipyard visit went particularly well. The workers seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the new environmental initiatives. They talked about his trip for several minutes before Camilla steered the conversation toward the topic that had been consuming her thoughts. "I heard about William and Kate's Christmas plans," she said casually. "Quite an interesting development." Charles looked up with surprise. "I thought you'd be pleased. You've always said we should find ways to modernize our traditions without losing their essential meaning." "Of course," Camilla agreed quickly. "I'm just curious about how it all came about. Kate approached me with the idea last week. She'd clearly thought it through very carefully, had considered all the logistics, the guest lists, even how to coordinate with our traditional celebration to avoid any conflicts." Charles smiled with obvious pride. "I was impressed by how thoroughly she'd prepared her proposal." The praise for Kate's thorough preparation felt like a rebuke to Camilla's own handling of recent events. She took a sip of wine before responding. "She certainly has been taking a more active role in planning lately." "Indeed. In fact, she mentioned that she'd sent you some thoughts about the Danish state visit arrangements, but hadn't heard back yet. I hope you don't mind, but I encouraged her to follow up directly if she has concerns. Her insights are often quite valuable." Camilla's hand tightened around her wine glass. Kate had been strategic even in her conversation with Charles, mentioning the letter without making it sound like a complaint. She had positioned herself as someone seeking dialogue while subtly highlighting Camilla's failure to respond. "I've been meaning to get back to her about that," Camilla said, the lie coming easier than she had expected. "The past few days have been absolutely mad with scheduling conflicts." "Of course," Charles agreed readily. "Perhaps you two could find time to chat this week? I think you'd both benefit from the collaboration." After Charles went to bed, Camilla remained in the sitting room, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace. The conversation had confirmed her worst fears. Kate had successfully positioned herself as the reasonable party in their conflict, someone who was thoughtfully trying to improve royal operations while dealing with an unresponsive colleague. The masterful way Kate had handled the situation was both infuriating and admirable. Instead of confronting Camilla directly about the ignored letter, she had simply continued working on the issues that concerned her. She had consulted with staff members, built consensus around her ideas, and even gained Charles's explicit support for her initiatives, all while maintaining the appearance of someone who was simply trying to do good work within the existing system. Camilla realized she had been outmaneuvered by someone who understood palace politics better than she had given her credit for. Kate wasn't just the pretty princess who had married into the family. She was a strategic thinker who had learned how to navigate royal power structures with remarkable skill. The destroyed letter now seemed like a minor transgression compared to the larger pattern it represented. Camilla had underestimated Kate's capabilities and overestimated her own position within the family hierarchy. She had assumed that her title and experience would be enough to maintain her authority, but Kate had shown her that influence in the modern monarchy came from competence and collaboration, not just tradition and rank. As she finally headed upstairs to bed, Camilla made a decision that would prove to be her third and most significant mistake. Instead of acknowledging Kate's superior handling of the situation and finding a way to work together, she decided to fight back. If Kate wanted to play palace politics, Camilla would show her how the game was really played. She began planning her counterattack as she climbed the stairs, unaware that she was about to escalate a manageable conflict into something that would threaten the stability of the entire royal family. Kate had given her multiple opportunities to resolve their disagreement gracefully, but pride and wounded ego were driving Camilla toward a confrontation that would have consequences far beyond anything either woman had imagined. That Camilla's counterattack began with what she considered a strategic masterstroke. If Kate wanted to demonstrate her commitment to royal protocol and tradition, Camilla would test just how committed she really was. She spent the morning crafting a detailed memorandum about upcoming state engagements that would require Kate's involvement, events scheduled at inconvenient times, with complex requirements and little advance notice. The memorandum was delivered to Kensington Palace that afternoon, written in formal language that made it impossible to refuse without appearing uncooperative. Camilla had specifically chosen engagements that would conflict with Kate's previously scheduled activities, forcing her to choose between her own initiatives and the duties Camilla was assigning. But Kate's response arrived just 2 hours later, and it wasn't what Camilla had expected. Instead of protesting the scheduling conflicts or requesting modifications, Kate had accepted every assignment and provided detailed plans for how she would fulfill each obligation without compromising her existing commitments. She had somehow found solutions that Camilla hadn't even considered, demonstrating an organizational ability that was both impressive and infuriating. Frustrated by Kate's adaptability, Camilla escalated her tactics. She began making subtle changes to events that Kate was organizing, ostensibly to ensure proper coordination with other royal activities. She moved meeting times, altered guest lists, and introduced new requirements that necessitated extensive revisions to Kate's carefully planned schedules. Each change was presented as a reasonable administrative adjustment, but the cumulative effect was clearly intended to undermine Kate's efforts and demonstrate who held real authority. Camilla expected Kate to eventually protest or at least show signs of strain under the constant modifications. Instead, Kate adapted to each change with remarkable grace, often finding ways to improve the events through the revisions. When guest lists were altered, she discovered new opportunities for meaningful connections. When schedules were modified, she identified more efficient ways to accomplish her goals. Her ability to turn Camilla's obstacles into advantages made the queen consort's interference look petty and counterproductive. The situation reached a critical point during a planning meeting for the Danish state visit. Camilla had scheduled the meeting for an unusually early hour, hoping to catch Kate unprepared. She arrived at the conference room in Windsor Castle feeling confident that she would finally gain the upper hand in their ongoing conflict. Kate was already there when Camilla entered, seated at the long mahogany table with neat stacks of documents arranged in front of her. She looked composed and professional, showing no signs of the stress that Camilla had been hoping to create. Several senior staff members were also present, their expressions carefully neutral as they prepared for what they clearly expected to be a tense encounter. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Kate said, rising from her chair with a respectful nod. "Thank you for arranging this meeting. I believe we have much to discuss regarding the Danish visit." Camilla took her seat at the head of the table, a position she had chosen specifically to emphasize her authority. "Indeed, I trust you've had time to review the preliminary arrangements." "I have," Kate replied, opening one of her folders. "I've also prepared some additional suggestions that I believe would enhance the overall experience for our guests." For the next hour, Kate presented a comprehensive plan that addressed every aspect of the Danish visit. Her preparations were flawless, her reasoning sound, and her attention to detail extraordinary. She had anticipated potential problems and developed solutions, identified opportunities for meaningful cultural exchange, and even found ways to incorporate sustainable practices that would appeal to modern sensibilities. As Kate spoke, Camilla felt her carefully planned confrontation slipping away from her. Instead of the unprepared, overwhelmed young woman she had expected to encounter, she was facing someone who had clearly put enormous effort into understanding every nuance of royal diplomacy. The staff members around the table were obviously impressed, nodding approvingly as Kate outlined her ideas. When Kate finished her presentation, she turned to Camilla with a polite smile. "I'd very much like to hear your thoughts on these proposals. I'm sure your experience will help identify areas where they might be improved." The request for feedback was expertly delivered, respectful enough to acknowledge Camilla's seniority while confident enough to suggest that Kate's ideas had merit. It was exactly the kind of collaborative approach that Camilla should have welcomed, but instead it felt like a challenge wrapped in diplomatic language. "Your proposals are certainly thorough," Camilla said slowly, buying herself time to think. She had come to this meeting expecting to dominate the discussion, not respond to Kate's comprehensive presentation. "Though I do have some concerns about the timeline for implementation." "Of course," Kate replied immediately. "I've actually prepared several alternative schedules that might work better." She pulled out another folder and began outlining backup plans that addressed every potential timing issue Camilla might raise. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Kate demonstrating again and again that she had thought through every possible objection or complication. By the time it ended, Camilla felt like she had been thoroughly outmaneuvered in front of her own staff. Kate's preparation and professionalism had made any criticism look petty and unfounded. As the staff members filed out, clearly energized by Kate's presentations, Camilla found herself alone with the younger woman for the first time since their conflict had begun. This was the moment she had been both dreading and anticipating, the chance for a direct conversation without witnesses or diplomatic buffers. "Your preparations for today were quite impressive," Camilla said, attempting to sound gracious while struggling with her wounded pride. "Thank you," Kate replied, gathering her documents with the same careful efficiency she had displayed throughout the meeting. "I wanted to ensure we made the best use of everyone's time." There was something in Kate's tone that made Camilla look up sharply. The younger woman's expression was still polite, still professional, but there was a new quality in her eyes, a directness that hadn't been there before. "I do hope you received my earlier correspondence about these matters," Kate continued, her voice remaining perfectly level. "I know how busy things can get, and important letters sometimes go astray." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. Kate knew. Somehow, she had figured out what had happened to her original letter. The careful preparation for today's meeting, the flawless responses to every challenge, the strategic positioning with staff members, and Charles. All of it had been Kate's response to realizing that her carefully crafted letter had been destroyed. "I'm afraid I don't recall," Camilla began, but Kate interrupted her with a gesture so subtle it was barely noticeable, just a slight shake of her head that somehow conveyed complete understanding of the situation. "Perhaps it's for the best," Kate said, standing gracefully from her chair. Sometimes direct conversation is more effective than written correspondence anyway. As Kate moved toward the door, Camilla felt panic rising in her chest. The younger woman was about to leave, and with her would go any chance of controlling the narrative around their conflict. "Kate, wait. Perhaps we should discuss. I think today's meeting covered everything quite thoroughly," Kate replied, pausing at the door but not turning around. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my ideas with you and the team." The formality of Kate's language was more cutting than any angry outburst would have been. She was treating Camilla with the same polite professionalism she would show to any colleague. No special deference, no acknowledgement of Camilla's superior rank, just courteous efficiency. "The Danish visit will be a wonderful success," Kate continued, finally, turning back to face Camilla. "I'm confident that working together, we can create something truly memorable for everyone involved." The phrase, "working together," hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Camilla's stomach clench. Kate was offering collaboration, but on terms of equality rather than subordination. She was suggesting that their future relationship would be based on mutual respect and shared authority rather than the hierarchy Camilla had been trying to maintain. As Kate left the room, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, Camilla remained seated at the conference table, surrounded by the remnants of her failed strategy. Every move she had made to assert her authority had only served to highlight Kate's competence. Every obstacle she had created had become an opportunity for Kate to demonstrate her problem-solving abilities. Worse still, Camilla was beginning to realize that Kate had known about the destroyed letter from the very beginning. The younger woman's subsequent actions, the alternative Christmas celebration, the consultations with staff members, the strategic conversation with Charles, had all been carefully calculated responses to Camilla's decision to ignore her original concerns. Kate had given Camilla multiple opportunities to address the situation gracefully. She had offered collaboration, shown respect for established protocols, and even provided diplomatic cover for Camilla's mistake. But instead of accepting these overtures, Camilla had chosen confrontation and control. Now, sitting alone in the empty conference room, Camilla finally, understood the full scope of her miscalculation. She hadn't just underestimated Kate's capabilities. She had completely misunderstood the nature of their relationship and her own position within the royal family's evolving power structure. The young woman who had just walked out of the room was no longer the uncertain newcomer who had once sought Camilla's guidance and approval. Kate had become a formidable force in her own right, someone who commanded respect through competence rather than demanding it through rank. And tomorrow, Camilla would have to face the consequences of treating such a person as a subordinate rather than recognizing her as an equal. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, as the most important moments often do. Camilla was in the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, reviewing seating charts for a charity gala when Kate appeared in the doorway. There was something different about the younger woman's demeanor, a quiet intensity that immediately put Camilla on alert. "Might I have a word?" Kate asked, stepping into the room without waiting for permission. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care, the soft click echoing in the sudden silence. Camilla set down her papers and turned to face Kate fully. "Of course. Please sit." But Kate remained standing, her posture erect and confident in a way that reminded Camilla uncomfortably of Queen Elizabeth herself. "I think we both know it's time to address what's really happening between us." The directness of the statement caught Camilla off guard. Gone was the diplomatic language, the careful politeness, the respectful deference. Kate was speaking as one equal to another, and her tone made it clear that she expected to be heard. "I'm not sure what you mean," Camilla replied, though they both knew she was lying. Kate moved closer, her steps measured and purposeful. "3 weeks ago, I sent you a letter regarding the Danish state visit. It contained thoughtful suggestions based on extensive research and consultation with protocol experts. I also included some broader ideas about how we might modernize certain royal traditions while maintaining their essential dignity." Camilla felt her throat tighten, but Kate continued without pause. "That letter was important to me. It represented hours of work, careful consideration of family dynamics, and genuine concern for the monarchy's future. I wrote it with respect for your position and hoped that we might work together more effectively." The room felt smaller with each word Kate spoke. Camilla found herself gripping the edge of her chair, knuckles white against the blue damask upholstery. "I never received a response to that letter," Kate continued, her voice growing quieter but more intense. "At first, I assumed you were busy. The Queen Consort has enormous responsibilities, after all. But when days passed with no acknowledgement, I began to wonder if something had gone wrong." Kate paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle between them. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new edge. "So I made some inquiries. Discreet ones, you understand. I spoke with people who handle correspondence, with staff members who coordinate between our offices. What I discovered was illuminating." Camilla's heart was pounding now, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with Kate. Whatever was coming, she would face it directly. "My letter was delivered successfully. It reached your private office exactly when it should have. It was placed on your desk along with other important correspondence." Kate took another step closer. "But somehow, it never made it to any filing system. There's no record of a response being drafted, no note of it being forwarded to relevant staff members. It simply disappeared." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla opened her mouth to speak, but Kate raised a hand to stop her. "Let me save us both some time," Kate said, her voice now carrying unmistakable steel beneath its polite surface. "I know you destroyed my letter." The admission hit Camilla like a physical blow. All her careful preparation, all her attempts to control the situation, crumbled in an instant. Kate's certainty was absolute, and any denial would only make things worse. "I don't know why you did it," Kate continued, beginning to pace in front of Camilla's chair. "Perhaps you saw it as presumptuous. Perhaps you felt threatened by suggestions from someone younger, someone who hasn't earned their position through decades of service. Or perhaps you simply disagreed with my ideas and decided the easiest way to handle it was to pretend they never existed." Each possibility Kate mentioned felt like another weight added to Camilla's chest. The worst part was that they were all partially true. "But what I find most disappointing," Kate said, stopping her pacing to face Camilla directly, "is not that you disagreed with me. Disagreement is healthy. It's not even that you chose not to respond, though that was discourteous. What disappoints me is that you underestimated me so completely." Kate's voice dropped to just above a whisper, making her words even more devastating. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you imagine I was too naive or too inexperienced to piece together what had happened? Did you assume that because I don't have your years of experience, I wouldn't know how to respond effectively? Camilla finally found her voice, though it came out weaker than she intended. Kate, I think you're misunderstanding, am I? Kate interrupted, her eyebrows rising slightly. Because from where I stand, it looks like you made a series of calculated decisions designed to diminish my influence and maintain your own position. You destroyed my letter to avoid dealing with my concerns. You used your authority to create obstacles for my work. You even tried to manipulate today's meeting to make me look unprepared and incompetent. The accuracy of Kate's assessment was stunning. She had seen through every one of Camilla's tactics with clarity that was both impressive and humiliating. But here's what you failed to understand, Kate continued, her voice gaining strength. I'm not the same person who married William 15 years ago. I'm not the uncertain young woman who needed guidance and approval from senior family members. I've learned how this institution works. I understand its strengths and its weaknesses, and I know my own value within it. Kate moved to the window, gazing out at the palace grounds where tourists gathered behind iron gates, hoping for a glimpse of royal life. I've spent years studying royal history, learning from past mistakes, preparing myself to contribute meaningfully to the monarchy's future. I've worked with charities, engaged with the public, represented our family with dignity in dozens of countries. I've earned my place here through effort and dedication, not just through marriage. When she turned back to Camilla, her eyes were blazing with a passion that was impossible to ignore. So when anyone, treats me like my opinions don't matter, like my contributions are irrelevant, like I'm still the anxious girl who once curtsied awkwardly and worried about using the wrong fork at dinner. Kate's voice rose slightly before she controlled it again. Well, that's when I remind them who I've become. The transformation in Kate was complete now. This wasn't the diplomatic princess or the careful royal daughter-in-law. This was a woman who had found her voice and her power, and who was no longer afraid to use both. You want to know what I whispered to myself when I realized you'd destroyed my letter? Kate asked, moving back toward Camilla's chair. I said, you've crossed the line. The phrase hit Camilla like thunder. She had expected anger, accusations, even demands for apology. But this quiet declaration of boundaries crossed, and consequences coming felt far more ominous. Because that's what you did, Kate continued. You crossed the line from professional disagreement into personal disrespect, from institutional hierarchy into petty power games, from legitimate authority into bullying behavior. Camilla felt tears stinging her eyes, though whether they were from shame, anger, or fear, she couldn't tell. I want you to understand something very clearly, Kate said, her voice returning to its earlier quiet intensity. I respect your position as queen consort. I value your experience and your dedication to this family. But I will not be dismissed, diminished, or disrespected. Not by you, not by anyone. Kate gathered her small handbag from where she had set it on a side table, preparing to leave. But she paused at the door for one final statement. The Danish state visit will proceed according to the plans we discussed in today's meeting. I trust you'll support those arrangements, as you indicated you would in front of the staff. Her tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. And, in the future, when I take the time to write thoughtful correspondence about important matters, I expect the courtesy of a response. Kate's hand was on the door handle when she delivered her parting words. You taught me something valuable today, Camilla. You showed me that I'm stronger than I knew, more capable than you believed, and more essential to this family's future than you're comfortable admitting. She turned the handle and opened the door. I should thank you for that lesson, even though I'm sure that wasn't your intention. As the door closed behind Kate, Camilla remained frozen in her chair, staring at the space where the younger woman had been standing. The room felt different now, smaller, dimmer, somehow less significant than it had just an hour earlier. She had witnessed something extraordinary, the emergence of a new kind of royal authority. Not the inherited power of bloodline or the accumulated influence of tradition, but the earned respect of competence, integrity, and unwavering self-respect. Kate had shown her what the future of the monarchy would look like. And, in that future, Camilla realized, she might not hold the position of influence she had assumed would always be hers. The destroyed letter had been more than a failure of communication. It had been a test that Camilla had failed spectacularly, and Kate had passed with flying colors. In trying to diminish Kate's voice, she had only amplified it. In attempting to maintain her authority, she had revealed its limitations. As evening shadows began to lengthen across the palace grounds, Camilla sat alone in the blue drawing room, Finally, understanding that the woman who had just confronted her with such devastating effectiveness was no longer someone to be managed or controlled. Kate had become someone to be reckoned with, and, perhaps, if Camilla was wise enough to change course, someone worth partnering with rather than fighting against. The whispered words echoed in her mind. You've crossed the line. They weren't just an accusation about past behavior. They were a warning about the future, delivered by a woman who had just proven she had both the strength and the skill to enforce boundaries that Camilla had foolishly thought didn't exist.